Carissima.
Yeah.
The last holiday I had before the war, we hired her, some of us, and fellow students and people.
Charisma?
Carissima.
Was that a yacht or a
Yacht.
Yes.
Which was the one that Nat had skippered at one time.
Yeah.
And Tom Poley. And Tom, I find out, and I've got a photograph of him somewhere, had been the original skipper of Albion when she was first built.
Mm.
So, or fairly early on when she was built for walkers at Bungay.
Yes. Yeah.
Of course, the other thing I missed out entirely was that in 1938, when I was a young law student, I was staying with friends at Scratby Hall in Norfolk.
Yeah.
In February, when the sea broke through at Horsey.
Yes. Yes.
And I was in the middle of that, and I got one of the Hickling punts, and I went right out to sea.
Yeah.
From Horsey Mere, we lifted her onto everything from Horsey Village right down to Winterton Martham, where the hill was underwater.
Yeah.
And we punted her. I've got a set of photographs I brought to show you of that.
Yeah.
We went right round. I had a lady friend with me, and we punted across, if you can imagine the windmill at Horsey, onto the floods, and we punted right down to the coast. And we could have gone out to sea, the water was going in and out, but we didn't risk it in a punt.
No.
We then came back to Martham, summited and stayed, lifted her over onto the thing, and came back to Hickling. Now, there aren't many people who've done that circuit, and the story of that I narrated.
Was that 53 or
38?
38.
And the photograph and the story of that is, and all the photographs is in the old Norwich City Library.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I presented the whole set of photographs there, but I've got a copy of the photographs here. I don't know whether I've got a copy of the narrative, but the narrative I typed it all out with a map of where, because there are a few people going down the road coming back between Horsey and Hickling, Horsey and Martham, I mean Horsey and Winterton, Horsey and Martham, isn't it? The road that runs straight along.
Yes.
And halfway down there was one of these old-fashioned Austin Sevens, if you can imagine it, with the water up to about the level of the bonnet. And when we got back to Hickling, nobody knew about it. When we got to Potterham, somebody said, "God bless, yes, there was some chap on that. He suddenly found the water coming through the floor in the middle of the night. It was about 10 o'clock at night, see, when the sea came. And we said, well, what happened to him? Well, he didn't know what to do. Because if he'd waded up, the road was absolutely level. The water would only have been up to his knees. He could have waded either way. He could have waded. He was near, I think he was near a Martham. Well, he didn't know what to do, so he got on top of the car and sat there. And Herbert Woods got him off the next morning with a motorboat. Blast, he was very near crazy when they got him off. Amazing, isn't it? And I got a photograph of this guy in the middle. I'll show it to you in a minute.
Yes.
Anyhow, so that's another interesting part of my life that I've seen some unusual things in Norfolk. But I mean, in those days, wherries were, you never thought they were going to finish.
You said Tom Poley was what's he in relation to the, because that was the first skipper was Jim Lacey. Well, Lacey was in, and Jack Poles was
Skipper of
Poley. Jack Poley was one of the early skippers of Albion, wasn't it? Jack Poley.
I don't know.
Yeah.
The only one I know of is Tom Poley.
Tom Poley.
Because in one of the books, in Malster's book, I think there's a photo of the Albion, because you know she was built for Bungay, as we know, and there's a photograph of her with Tom Poley on the foredeck with one of the WD&8, one of the Miss Walkers, who the family she was built for. And I think that's in Malster's book. I think.
Yeah.
But she was built, of course, for walkers at Bungay. And I have actually been up to Bungay by boat. You know the river's now blocked. But during the war I was able to borrow an old rowboat.
They're actually thinking of opening that up again, though. There's been a piece in the paper lately about opening the navigation back to Bungay.
They ought to open this navigation up here to Aylsham.
Yeah.
The little Zulu, a little wherry I knew quite well, whose boards we got, and which are in the museum at Yarmouth. Yeah. She belonged to when I knew her, she belonged to Richards of Catfield when I lived at Hickling. She was a little wherry. And she was built, and of course she was marooned on the land somewhere up here when Roxham Bridge, when the floods blocked the bridge. And
that's where they brought across the bridge.
That's right.
Yeah.
1912, that was. This river was never. And this one's still a statutory navigation. That's never been abolished.
No.
The rights on the Bungay one, and of course North Washington. No, I'm sorry, this one's not. The rights on this,
that's
I think,
the
North Washington Dilham.
Yeah.
They ought to be open. They all ought to be open. I mean, you look at the rest of England where they've opened hundreds thousands of miles.
That's right.
So we're getting away from. So anyhow, my own interest in wherries was, of course, I used to occasionally get a sail on the wherry. Some of the old skippers would say, "You hop aboard, boy, and come down with me as far as Acle or something like this." You see, Acle, which rhymes with Tacle. This is in the 30s. I'm sorry, it's a bit out of order. You'll have to forgive me.
No, that's right.
But anyhow, just before a month or two before the war, I was married. My first wife was now deceased, and you know I have 3 children and a splendid stepson who you've met. My daughter is married to Peter Tracy, the son of Dr. Tracy, who famous man who refounded the Punt Club. And they had my daughter spent the first 3 years of her life living in a wherry. Then she lived, when her first married life, she lived in a narrow boat, a canal boat. And then they've had a Dutch botter. So, and then I've got a son, I've got 2 sons. One has been married to a museum curator in Scotland, and my elder son, who did live at Cambridge, is a lecturer at Exeter University. So, you know, they're all boaty-minded. But anyhow, my former wife, Dorothy, who unfortunately passed away some years ago. We were married about 2 months before the war, and when the war started out, because my regiment had been mobilised, already mobilised, and I don't know, we got told where we were going to live. We'd had a small flat in London, and London was going to be bombed. And she knew I was in boats, and somewhere, I don't know what gave us the idea, why don't we buy a wherry and live in a wherry? Mm-hmm. And so, very early, 939 or middle of we bought the Bramble, which had been built at Colishall by a press, not Colishall, Beela, by a press of Roxon in about 1898 for the Preston family of Barton Hall.
That's when she was Empress of India.
That was when she was built as the Empress of India, and she had the Preston coat of arms carved in the front of her mast, a circle with something underneath it. And she was a beautiful little wherry. She was a small wherry, about the size of the Zulu, beautifully easy to handle. She was about 53 feet. I should think without the rudder, probably about 58 foot overall. But she had light, you could winch the sail up with one hand mostly. She was a lovely little wherry, and she had an auxiliary engine. Anyhow, we managed to buy her, because everything on the Broads stopped, all the trade and everything. We bought her for a reasonable sum then. And my former wife lived in her all through the war. At Beccles, on Beccles Quay, with Billy Thurgood, the harbour master, who was another great character. And when I used to go on leave, we used to get the sail out and bend the sail and sail her up. We weren't allowed to sail below Alderby Swing Bridge, but we could sail down as far as that, and we could go up to Colishall Lock. We used to go up to Colishall Lock, so I could sail my own wherry. I never had a paid hand aboard. I always sailed her myself. And
just you and your wife sailing the wherry?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, very often I'd have 1 or 2 brother officers with me.
Yeah.
But sometimes it was only my wife and myself. Yeah. And I say my daughter was born in 1940. She was now nearly 50. I lived aboard as a baby. And it wasn't until we got 2 children when my ex-wife said she couldn't cope, and we bought a small house in Heatherset. But I kept the wherry until for about 10 years, and then sold her eventually.
Was it 1940 when you sold it?
No, I bought her about in 1939, 40. Yeah. Sold her about 1948, 950.
Yeah.
And she was sold to Price, the ironmonger of Lowestoft. I think one of the Bates, Jimmy Bates, skippered her. Of course, there are people, Bob Bates and Jimmy Bates, and they sold, and she'd been broken up. Now she went to Brown's of Martham, and they used her as a houseboat along with the Hartall.
Yes, I've actually got one of the catalogues with her in there being used as a houseboat with a layout.
Yeah. Well, I've got some photos of her, of course. Anyhow, she was broken up now, but she was a great pity. I wish I could have kept her, you know. I also had a 14-foot dinghy then. And anyhow, as a result of that, I'd qualified as a lawyer after the war, and I came back to Norfolk to practice, and we lived at Brundle. And in 1948, a letter appeared in the press, signed, I think, by Roy Clark and Humphrey Borden, saying that it was a great pity that I say, when I lecture, excuse me if I'm getting away from something, stop me, for heaven's sake. But when I lecture, and I do lecture quite often, I always say that Frank Carr, you know, the famous curator, and who was still alive, a great friend of mine, came and spoke to us in 1948 in Norwich on the idea of saving a wherry. And he said, and he's of course one of the great authorities on ships all over the world, and he says, and I always use this in my opening remarks, in the middle of the last century there were over 200 types of trading craft under sail round our coasts and on our inland water. Were billy boys, Humber keels, Humber sloops, I mean, I'm in one area, Norfolk wherries, Thames barges, Dover deal smacks, Tyne keels, all sorts of sailing craft, all around, over 200 types. And in the middle of the 30s, the middle of 1930s, there were still 2,000 Thames barges trading under sail. And in the middle of the last century, there were 300 wherries or something of that sort. We don't know exactly how many, but there were 300 wherries which had replaced the keels. And do you know how many of those types were left after the Second War? By 1948, only 4 types. There were 16 or 17 Thames barges. There were no wherries. There was 1 Humber keel, 1 Strangay Creek fisherman or something, or 1 or 2 in the West Country, and 1 other. And the whole fleet had gone. Of course, now people have revived them quite a bit, but we were the first people in the idea of founding a trust to save a vessel under sail. Well, now we looked at the people who really gave the boost to the trust were Beryl Mayhew and Humphrey, and we had a meeting in February, I think, February 1949. The trustee, I think, stated February 49, I think. Maybe it was out. And we had this meeting in Norwich and we raised £500, and then Lady Mayhew said, well, now we start looking for wherry hulls, trading wherry, and there wasn't one worth saving. They were all in about the state, not quite as bad as the keel now, but they were all in pretty bad state. They had been left rotting and they hadn't been used, or there was the Lord Roberts. She was half rotten, her timbers had all gone. Even then she wasn't worth looking at, and she had a motor in her anyway. There was the Oil Try, several we looked at, but they were all, several of them belonged to May Gurney or Bruta Thane, but they were all well past it, and we had advice from a surveyor, not John Perrin, but we had a surveyor. And everyone said, well, and then Lady Mayhew came along and said, now look, as you may know, her husband was the managing director of Beckett Coleman's, Sir Basil, and also a big man in the press, and he said, now look, they've got a wherry at Coleman's. What about that? So we said, well, she said she was nearly burnt during the war because she laid in a shed alongside the Iolanthe?
No, it's Eudora.
Eudora. And the Eudora was burnt and the other one wasn't. They said she's hull there, and you can have her for her written down value in our books. They'd used it to store mustard all through the war, and she was written down to I think £100, and they said if you can find £100 you can have her. And that's how we started the trust. Humphrey was Lady Mayhew, Lewis Story and Hector Reed were the original trustees. Roy Clark was the secretary. I was the treasurer and solicitor to the trust. Humphrey was the chairman, Humphrey Boardman. We had a great committee. We had Percival, H.T. Percival, Colonel Denning, a lad called Miller, W.L. Clabburn, the famous lawyer, the sailing man, Jimmy Claburn's father. And anyhow, we started off the trust. There may have been others, I can't remember. And we then, of course, got the Well, of course, she had no mast, no sails. Her decks were rotten, but she was Carvel built. But she was in much better order than anything else we'd looked at, including the Lord Roberts. I mean, it wasn't worth looking at any of the others, to the amount they wanted. Well, then we took it. We said, well, what are we going to repair? And anyhow, Roy Clark, who was a great moving spirit, said managed to get round Richards to agree to repair her. So we had her towed down to Richards. And we were going to try and trade with her. He said, well, why can't we get the trade going? So we employed the 2 Cates brothers, Jack, who of course was the finest wherryman ever out, and his brother George, who was always known as Shackles for some reason. And she was towed down, and we've got slides of her at Richards. And of course they said, well, you've got a job here. I said we'd raised about £700, paid £100 for the wherry. Well, they said, you've got to spend about £2,000 on doing anything with this. Well, we did. Lady Mayhew and Humphrey said, well, now look, we've got to do this. We've got to guarantee the money to the bank. And for years, the trust, as you've heard me say at meetings, operated with a big overdraft, which was guaranteed by... anyhow, she went to Richards, and Richards rebuilt her. They started on, I suppose, in the middle of 49. And the maiden voyage, I think, and I've got the slides at home, I can do this from memory, was I think in October 49, right, when we took the Mayor of Yarmouth and did the traditional, sailed him up as far as Hardley Cross. Do you know about this?
Yes.
Where she was landed, and then we met the Mayor of Norwich, and we went on to Norwich. Well, of course, the great difficulty of fitting her out was to get because you don't know, but after the war, you couldn't buy a bit of wood that long without special government permits, and there wasn't anything. Everything had disappeared in the war. And to get a mast, particularly, was an absolutely incredible thing. I think in the end, do you know the story about the mast?
She was pitch pine.
Well, of course, they should be pitch pine, Douglas fir, but we couldn't get one, nothing, and eventually somebody produced a spar of Oregon pine and said, oh, you can have this, it's just the thing, and it was the right size, because it has to be 17 inches square without a knot or shake for 60 feet of its length to make a wherry mast. Anyhow, we had this Oregon pine,
was a lot heavier, wasn't it?
No, lighter, I should
Lighter,
think.
was it? Yeah.
But anyhow, and we had to get lead for that. That was also, you couldn't get lead, and you couldn't get canvas to make the sail. I don't know who made the original sail. Whether Jekyll's did, I'm not sure. I don't think Jekyll's did. Anyhow, we managed to get all these difficulties. And old Werriman said, "Oh, that won't last, you know. That ain't no good. That won't last. That mast is yours. That's no good anyhow. That should be pitch pine." Well, as we know, they were quite right. In 1951, it broke, cracked like that in the middle. I've got pictures of it breaking in that one of those books. And we then managed to get, I think, imported especially from Canada or something, or Norway, a Douglas fir, which is pitch pine, which made it a proper mast, which lasted 20 years or so.
Yeah.
But that's the story. Anyhow, as I say, after a fairly short time, various problems arose. Well, mainly because of the debts we owed a good deal to the bank. And Lewis Story and Hector Reed decided to resign. Roy Clark also decided to resign. I think he had business worries or something, because he was a bookseller. He had a bookshop named Augustine Still's house in Tombland. Now he decided to give up. And Humphrey and I were the two sort of senior people left, so we said, well, we must step in the gap. We were already involved anyway.
What year was that?
That would have been about 51.
Yeah.
I can tell by looking at the trust deed, which I haven't got here, but I've got at home. That's why I say, sometime you better come over to my house and we can get a lot more information, because I haven't bought everything. You see. Anyhow, or I can give it to you on the phone if you want it accurately. But Humphrey and I became trustees in place of these two who retired. I became secretary also for a time, as well as treasurer. Humphrey was still chairman, and so the trustees were Lady Mayhew, Humphrey and myself, and we had guaranteed the money, and for years the trust did run on a quite substantial overdraft. It was the only way to keep it going. And at one time, I say this now, about 26 years ago, I thought, maybe a bit more, we accountants, and we had one or two lawyers on the committee then, and apart from myself, you know what they are to one. They kept saying, you can't go on like this, the trustees are at risk and so. And of course, like Lady Mayhew and Humphrey, well off. They said, oh well, never mind, we've guaranteed we must keep it going. And these people said, oh, the only thing you ought to do is to wind this up while you still could be solvent and pay it off, and they refused to, and I followed suit. I mean, we've guaranteed the thing, but then some of this got into the papers, and this was when we got a letter from an extraordinary chap at Lowestoft saying, I've read all this and I feel this way, they ought to be saved, it can't be too much longer. Signed John Perryman. And that was what I was speaking about at the annual meeting the other day, you see, when I was he and Dougie Blewett came along, and they came for a meeting, and they said, well, he said, all right, you may want to do, Tim, if you don't give up simply because of the vessel. Perhaps she was then, I suppose, 70 odd years old, but he said, we've got this stuff.
What was this in the 70s, was it?
Oh, no.
Or 60s?
I would say in the 60s. You really ought to go and have a look at the minute books. And all my...
I've got all the minute books, actually.
Have you? Well, you know that more my own original papers.
Yeah, I got all Humphrey's.
Oh, well, all my papers are held, because we've had, before Pam, and various secretaries and people who've not always been, perhaps, as efficient as Pam, perhaps, and things have tended to disappear or get lost. Yeah. So all my papers have been presented in stages to Yarmouth Maritime Museum, to Charles Lewis, to keep on behalf of myself and the trust, so that they're available. So at least I've got somebody reliable. See, because between you and I, various times things have disappeared. Things have not, and so so the original minute books, things are all there, and all the information. So I'm rather, working without. But I would say it's probably, we go back 26 years from 90. What is that? 70. It's about in the middle 60s, isn't it?
Yeah, about 65.
About 65. And John Perryman said, well, it's ridiculous, we can't. So anyhow, we agreed with him, and eventually, as you know, we had a big appeal about 1970. The Duke of Edinburgh sponsored.
That was 66.
Was it 66? Was it long ago as that? Well, that gives you an idea of the date. Was it
very
long ago?
weak.
Very weak, quite
when,
right. The Duke of Edinburgh was
and
sponsored.
Harry Perry was the ex-Lord Mayor of Norwich.
Well, I don't remember that.
Yeah.
But anyhow,
I got pictures in the book there.
Anyhow, the Albion, we raised the money, and the Albion was then taken down to Richards again, I think. And now, what am I talking about? I'm getting confused now. But she had a sort of major overhaul, but subsequent to that, I would think in the early 70s.
Once you take down Halls, yeah.
I don't know.
I
Fellows.
think that was...
Fellows. She went to Fellows.
Could have been Fellows, yes.
Fellows at one time.
I've got lots of different pictures of her being pulled out of different yards.
But yes, well now, but the bit I'm sure about is that, or nearly sure about, and again, I haven't got the slides here, but I can get to the dates in a minute from the slides.
Well, I can soon find
1971 or 2, I think, she was taken to George Over's abroad, who were wooden shippers, and we reframed her. Now this must have been, this was after the Wherry Appeal. The Wherry Appeal came first.
I got the pictures of her being reframed in John Harriman's book.
Well now, about when that was done, we had yet another appeal on this occasion. We raised 3,000, we got a donation from the Department of Education, who said she was being used for education, and they said, yes, we'll give you half of what it's going to cost. The estimate was 6,000 to reframe her. And we raised 3,000, and they gave us 3,000. So that made the 6,000 quid. Then John Payman had a reframed with this oak with special Brunofen, the special composition that he pumps into her. And of course the frames were as good as ever, and they were gone for years and years and years. That was the first major part. Then of course we had a sale given to us by Bradbeers, the last sale we've replaced, and of course more recently we had a sale by Brooks. So that is the sort of history. And then about, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago, Lady Mayhew was getting great because she's over 90 now, and Humphrey wanted to retire, and I couldn't get on single-handed. So they then made me chairman of the trust. I was chairman possibly then. By that time, I've been chairman for a long time, about 8 years. Shows you on that thing. And after Humphrey retired, Humphrey was chairman for 12 years, and I was chairman I think for 8. So it must have been after 20 years, which is what, 1948. About 1970, Humphrey and Lady Mayhew became vice presidents, and I then got Ian Mackintosh, who of course was a great hope, and John Crane as trustees. And then of course before Ian died, and one of the trustees, and Michael Brett came in, and Mrs. Mackintosh, and they came in of course when Ian Mackintosh died, and that must be 7 or 8 years ago now.
Yes.
And of course John is about, so they have been associated with the trust for a long time, but that's my own association. But so you realise that I've had a lifetime really associated with the cause and with Wherries, and I bitterly regret having sold or given up my Bramble, because she was such a lovely ship. When the Albion, after all this, the Bramble was what they called a trading. You know, they judge a wherry by the amount it would carry.
Yes.
Now the Bramble would have been a trading wherry. She never was. She was she was a 25-ton wherry. Yeah. The Albion is 40-ton wherry. Well, the Albion is like driving a bus with when you steer it, because you know you steer with your back with your feet out like this. Yes. In a strong wind, the Albion is absolutely.
You don't even need a strong wind. If you get a sudden gust, you can feel it in your back. Yeah.
But the Bramble was I wouldn't say you could steer with one hand, but she was a lovely light little wherry compared with beautiful wherry. She's about the same size as the Zulu. The Zulu, which I remember belonged to Richards at Catfield, and.
So actually on Bramble 8 years.
9 to 10 years.
10 years.
Very pity I parted with her. Anyhow, I knew, and also one was very hard up after the war too. And then after that, when we came to live at Roxham, or before we came to live at Roxham, we've been in our present house 15 years. We were at Roxham, I think, about 25 years ago. I bought a boat called Blue Jacket, which is a little racing yacht built by Piero Collins. Which was a sort of gunter-rigged yacht, which I believe somebody has got keeps at Coldham Hall, and I think she's done quite well racing. She was sort of, the cruiser race. She was a 22-foot cruiser, nice little boat. Oh, before that, after the war, I bought immediately after the war, when I sold the Bramble, I bought 49. I bought a brown boat, Tern number 9, and I had her for 14 years or something. I never really been a racing man. It was a mistake perhaps, although they were lovely boats to sail, beautiful boat, great fun. I had her for years, and I did race occasionally. I have won races with England, but not. I don't consider myself by any means a racer. I like to sail for pleasure and fun, but I had the brown boat. And next Saturday, as ever is the 90th anniversary of the foundation of the brown boat class.
Oh, yeah.
And they're having a big dinner at the Norfolk Suffolk Yacht Club, and they've invited all the owners, and I'm going with my daughter.
Yes.
And Lady Mayhew's coming down from London.
I got the video of the brown boat. It's the one with the Albion on it as well.
Well, they're coming down. Lady Mayhew's coming down from London next Saturday. She's 91, and I should go and see my Jeffy Dicker's got my old boat now. But, Tommy Tillett had her for a time, and then Jeffy Dicker's got her. But they were. And then after that, I've loved cruising so much, and to get a comfortable yacht, you've got to get about a Broad's type, or anything about 32 foot, and you need a decent crew. And my present wife is not all that keen on sailing, because she was rather scared sailing in a brown boat, because they heel over and they go like hell, and she had some rather frightening experiences. So we bought a motor cruiser, this Freeman motor cruiser from Keith King, Horning Ferry Boatyard. We bought her. She could be trailed. She was 22 foot long. She was like a Sprite caravan inside. She had every luxury. She had 4 berths, big galleon, loo, everything you would want, and she had a Ford console type engine, and she was a jolly handy little boat. And with her we cruised a good many of the British. We've been across England. We went across Cambridge. We had her on the Fens. We went across the Wash.
In the 50s?
No, this would be in the 60s and 70s. 60s and early 70s. We went across the Wash, and we went right across the Leeds and Liverpool Canal up to Swallow. We didn't quite to Liverpool. We got to Wigan and back. We went up the Nene, up the Ouse, and we've done other cruises on the British canals by hiring boats, because we couldn't, because she wasn't a narrow Freeman. She was 7'6", so she wouldn't go on the narrow canals. Then we found by trailing her we could take her to Holland, and we had her in 71 and 72, I think. We had her in Holland for 3 months, 2 years running, and we went right across the cruises Gypsy 1 year. Second year I had Guy Crane with me as crew for a time, John's brother, Guy who's dead now, the older crew, and we went round Friesland, and we did some very extensive cruises. We went across the Iceland there. We went to Enkhuizen, where the wonderful Maritime Museum is, and then we had her in Brittany, where I did a report on the waterways which interested Brakes. They were interesting, and now there are hire boats all over the Breton canals. We were there about 3 months, from north to south, and from the Nantes à Brest, and the canal which links the channel through Rennes to the Bay of Biscay. We've been on all those waterways. We've been on other canals with my daughter and various boats in France. So we really have done a very considerable amount of boating. And then about 5 years ago, we really felt, I'm now 74 next week, and we felt we were getting too old, so we sold her. I haven't got a boat for the first time in my life at present. But my elder son, who's a lecturer at Exeter University, has got a boat rather like my Freeman, slightly smaller, with an outboard, which we're keeping in the middle level at a place called Upwell. Upwell, with the Dale chap called Jeff Johnson, who's another very keen on waves, who's known the Broads, although he lives in the Fens. So we've had a pretty good lifetime of boating. Well, now I don't know if you want to ask any questions, or if you'd like to look at the pictures and see.
I looked at the pictures.
Well, look, shall I come and sit beside you?
What I asked you for, if there was a nice...
Right, can you move up a bit?
Yes.
Sit there. That one book you've seen, haven't you?
Yes. Let me just...